Believe it or not, in the grimdark future of Warhammer 40k, there are people who break the law. Shocking, I know, given that 40k is such a paradisiacal utopia where everyone is happy and all their needs are met. But it's true. Every day across the Imperium of Man, countless lawbreakers run amok, causing havoc for the good people of the Emperor's realm. Some are garden variety heretics, causing trouble in the name of the Chaos Gods or Xenos, but not quite prevalent enough to warrant Space Marines or the Inquisition. Others are more local problems, such as the gangers of Necromunda. In day-to-day life, sure, they aren't causing too much trouble, but every now and again, one of these gangs will overstep their bounds and need someone to put them back into line. And worst of all, some people commit the ultimate crime of asking for decent living conditions, or why they need to slave away in a factory for 20 hours a day. For such criminals, there can be nothing but the harshest of punishments, for the Emperor needs all of mankind to follow his laws and do their duty. But fear not, citizen. There exists an organization dedicated to ensuring the law is followed to the letter and spirit. The hallowed Adeptus Arbites, where people wear buckets on their heads, wield weaponry that's got more punch than the guard, and uphold the law no matter the cost. Join me today as I explain to you why you will be paying the tithe and you will remain loyal to the Imperium, because otherwise you will be tried, sentenced, and executed within the matter of about 5 seconds. But before I begin rambling, tell me, would you like your bed to be comfortable? I bet that you would, in which case may I introduce you to Helix Sleep, the sponsor of this video. Helix Sleep makes nothing short of the finest mattresses that have ever graced this planet. Do you want a soft mattress? The Helix Sunset is perfect for you. Want a firmer mattress to plant yourself on at the end of the day? The Helix Twilight has you covered. What about if you're like me and want something in between, because Goldilocks was correct and you've got to find the bed that's just right? The Midnight is the ultimate choice. And to make sure you get the right mattress, or if you have no idea, there's the Helix Sleep Quiz. You just take a questionnaire that'll take you 2 minutes tops, and then it'll match you with the perfect mattress for your sleeping needs. I got the Helix Midnight Lux, and I have to say, it's been a treat. I've had it for over a year now, and I've slept wonderfully the whole time. But an entire mattress isn't the only thing Helix offers. Introducing the Helix Mattress Toppers. With these bad boys, any mattress can be made so much more comfortable. You've got an option for half soft and half firm for couples with different preferences, an option for if you've got back pain, options for softness and firmness. These things give you all the options you want. I've lent mine to my dad and he said nothing but glowing reviews for it, and to be honest, I think that's the best review I can give it. He just thinks it's great to sleep on, so Helix not only has my thumbs up, but my father's as well. And if you too want to grab yourself either a Helix mattress or mattress topper, I've just the thing for that. Head on over to helixsleep.com/PancreasNoWork, which can be found in a description and pinned comment to get yourself 27% off site-wide for the 4th of July sale. That's helixsleep.com/PancreasNoWork, or click the link in the description and pinned comment for 27% off the whole site. You should always rest your best, and with Helix there's no better sleep out there, so get yourself some Helix today to sleep all the better tonight. Now then.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
The Adeptus Arbites, as I said, are something resembling a police force, and indeed their entire origins are parody. Parody, granted, is me being nice with it, because usually with a parody there's some idea you're changing things or exaggerating them. The Arbites, meanwhile, are just Judge Dredd. This is not a criticism, I should have you know. An entire organization of Judge Dredd is the coolest thing ever. Who doesn't want an intergalactic version of the guy who shoots you for jaywalking? The new kill team did differentiate some of the designs a little bit, but you can still tell what they are. The specifics of the bucket hat may have changed, but the origins of the bucket remain true. As for where the Law Boys train, they, alongside many poor other sods, come from the illustrious Scala Progenium. Now I, as a person, do not have enough knowledge, writing ability, or interest, if I'm to be honest, in making an entire video about the Scala Progenium. So here's the cliff notes. Imagine something like Hogwarts or Camp Half-Blood. Now instead of it being a special school/training ground for those who are a bit more than normal, it's where the Imperium of Man dumps the many orphans it churns out. Sometimes they're orphans of soldiers, sometimes they're orphans of factory accidents, sometimes the Imperium sees someone has real talent and makes them an orphan. And now instead of this taking place in a magical place, it's barely a step above prison and designed to turn these orphans into commissars, sororitas, and of course, members of the Adeptus Arbites. The training is brutal, though there are apparently recreational sports to be had if Caiaphas Cain is anything to go by, and training involves teaching them as much what to do as what not to do. That latter part usually comes across when a cadet dies and the instructor points at them and says don't do what they did. Naturally, this is incredibly brutal, with plenty of more standard rough punishments like 100 push-ups for buttoning your uniform incorrectly. Some people may say that's just the military as we know it, and from stories I've heard about boot camp, that may be true. Unlike the real world, however, these punishments are applied to a 10-year-old. Selection for a specific organization occurs as a given child's talent becomes noticed. For the Arbites, I imagine that they're looking for more investigative recruits. People that can sniff out any discrepancies in scenarios they're presented with, that kind of person. Of course, I also imagine that the Arbites would do well for a potential recruit notice to be particularly brutal when dispensing punishments. Sure, someone able to instill fear would make an excellent commissar, but there's a certain commanding presence that I feel goes into a commissar. Whether they're like Kane and genuinely care for the lives of their soldiers, or are more stereotypical and gun down the first person to suggest a tactical withdrawal, they have to have a certain presence. The Arbites certainly have an attention-grabbing presence as well, but at the same time I think that presence is easier to manufacture. Commissars have to be the scariest thing around when someone's fighting something like the Tyranids. Arbites just need to dispense frequently lethal justice. Sure, they'll look intimidating, and they can shock and awe with the best of them, but the Arbites aren't standing up to hive tyrants with the intent of being scarier than one. Of course, it could also be the case that Arbites training is for those who seem like they can flip that kind of trait like a switch. Investigating and following clues is needed, so they do need to be subtle at times, but depending on the case, an Arbites also needs to be ready to go loud and start fighting. As such, a level of versatility is expected, which is actually backed up by one of the Dark Tide dialogue bits they can say. One of the Arbites mentions appreciating the versatility another party member has, so maybe it's a sort of middle ground. The Scala orphans that prefer to always be loud and visible become commissars, the sneaky bastards become inquisitorial acolytes, and those in the middle become Arbites. Regardless, all Arbites, as I assume is fairly standard to some extent across Scala students, are removed from any potential ties they may have had. For them, there is only the Imperium, the Adeptus Arbites, and the Lex Imperialis that defines the law. Also, because someone will crawl up my ass if I don't mention it, Arbites are technically called arbitrators. However, that word has too many syllables, it even contains the word traitor within it, so I will continue to call them Arbites instead of what is clearly an accidental heresy. Anyways, once an Arbites has joined the ranks of the Arbites proper, they become a trooper. This is the lowest rank in the Adeptus Arbites, but the ranks are actually a fairly fluid thing. There are levels and promotions to the Adeptus Arbites. It isn't like every single member is technically the same rank, like in the Inquisition. But at the same time, if there's nothing but a trooper available for a pressing issue, they can step into the role of what would otherwise be filled by a higher-ranking Arbites. Only up to a point, as I can't imagine some random new blood could walk into the High Lords of Terra's conference room and fill in for the Grand Provost Marshal, but if there's only one guy around, they've gotta be the investigator, judge, jury, and executioner. Granted, all Arbites are all of those things to some extent, but the specifics of each of those things varies based on how experienced they are. A lot of the ranks are more of a side grade than a full-on promotion, too. Investigators are exactly what they sound like, snooping through crime scenes and looking for evidence and whatnot. Intelligencers, aside from apparently being a real word if Google Doc autocorrect is anything to go by, are spy masters and tacticians, gathering and using information to form plans for the Adeptus Arbites. Beyond those paths, though, there's specialists that can be any rank. Chaplains are much like Space Marine chaplains, and the guy who handles the cyber dogs has their own role too. There's loads of particulars not too worth getting into like this because the name is usually pretty obvious as to what they do. For some more specifics though, after Trooper you become an Enforcer, who tend to be called in when law is totally breaking down and it's time for the organization to break skulls en masse. Arbitrator is, aside from the technically proper name for an Arbites, the rank that most often interacts with the common man, by which I mean tells them to put their hands where they can see them and then guns them down anyways. Judges are where things start getting away from constantly either beating people's heads in or planning the beating of people's heads in. The judge role, as you've no doubt assumed, is to judge cases that require a bit more thought put into them rather than just shooting the guy who committed the crime of being an underhiver or something like that. They still, of course, will bring the hammer down on any lawbreakers if they need to in a commanding role on the battlefield, but they also have more grandiose duties as you'd expect of a judge. Magistrates are more senior judges who get the most exciting cases in the Imperium. Heresy cases. If you're accused of doing a witchery, these are the fellows who decide if it's actual witchery or something more mundane. Although if you'll forgive my cynicism, if someone's case gets this far, they're probably dead no matter the ruling. Magistrates are reserved for the most difficult to decipher cases of heresy, when there isn't something immediately obvious you can punish. Obviously, if you've got the mark of Slaanesh tattooed on your cheeks, and which cheeks I'll leave to your discretion, you're dead, but if for some reason it isn't immediately decided you're a heretic, you might get judged by these lads. They'll be the most senior Arbites in a given precinct, because of course they organize themselves into precincts, and handle real real head-scratchers of a case. Above them are marshals. Same thing as a magistrate, truth be told, but now they oversee an entire planet, if not several star systems, depending on how populous they are. Terra probably has tens of thousands of these bastards alone, and if you think that I'm exaggerating, I'm fairly sure the population of Terra is in the quadrillions at the least. They also revert back to combat mode a bit, because when the deepest pits of the Underhive hold heresy within them, the marshals lead the operation to root them out. Justicars, meanwhile, are marshals who, while technically higher rank, do the exact same thing but dealing with the nobility of the Imperium. Just because they live in utter luxury doesn't mean they're any less capable of heresy, and if anything, they're more likely to be able to hide it, so sometimes they need to be reminded that no amount of money can let you escape the law. The Arbites law anyways, local law enforcement can absolutely be bribed. The second to last meaningful rank is Lord Marshal, one in charge of an entire sector, and then there's the Grand Provost Marshal, the High Lord of Terra representing the Adeptus Arbites as a whole. While all High Lords have unrivaled legal power, I have to imagine this one has just a little bit more, at least in terms of what they can directly put into becoming or stop from becoming a law. After all, they are the High Lord of the legal department. Their entire career is studying and upholding the law, and as such they can probably brute force things a bit more effectively than other High Lords. Now, I've said the word law as of right now 17 times in this video, and I expect that will only continue to rise in number, but what the hell even is Imperial law? Well, you see, that's a funny thing. A very funny thing. No one knows. If you didn't know, the Imperium isn't really held together all that well. It's pretty much only a shared belief in the God Emperor that keeps it remotely culturally unified, and given that rebellions break out just about every single day because people tend to not like oppressive regimes, it doesn't even keep these planets politically unified half the time. As for something as simple as them being able to communicate with each other, most planets are basically still on their own. Sure, their canon will usually be some form of sector-wide governance, but a lot of the time their influence is only really felt when it's time for the tithes to be collected. As such, these planets will have and develop their own different laws. In time, these laws will then be added to the Book of Judgment, which is a bit of a misnomer in and of itself because the contents of this book are found in an acres-large building called the Hall of Judgment. Hundreds of volumes are added to it every single day, and for once in 40k, this kind of scale actually makes perfect sense, at least to me. Thinking of this as a single work being worked on by someone or even a large group of someone's is incorrect. It's a collection of every single legal case the Imperium can get its hands on, submitted by a given planet's Arbites. As you can expect of this, there will be wildly different cases and precedents set. What one planet considers to be the peak of criminality is the way to say hello on another one, which means that when consulting a Book of Judgment, an Arbites has to figure out what the hell they're supposed to do and how to provide context to each of these cases. And because the Imperium is 10,000 years old, that means there's 10,000 years of conflicting case resolutions to sort through even before context is taken into account. Worse is that the Imperium's record-keeping compounds on this issue. The Administratum can charitably be said to be a bit disorganized, and that's assuming the information from a prior legal case even exists still. People don't like computers in 40k, so more often than not, the entire court hearing is written down on parchment that's stored in a library and then left to rot. By the time it might come into handy, it could have just decayed away. Or the planet it came from is gone, be it destroyed or just forgotten about, which is a problem for other planets using this information because the language they use went with them and now no one can read the damn report. And while this bit is fairly commonly known since it wasn't a TTS special, it's still funny to talk about, and so I will. Sometimes cases are so obscure and any precedent set so conflicting that figuring out what to do takes hundreds of years. As you're no doubt aware, humans do not live hundreds of years. Rejuvenate treatments in this setting can be used by those with sufficient wealth, but Johnny the Hive Ganger likely doesn't have sufficient wealth. So Johnny dies, the Arbites overseeing his case dies, the case passes on to the next guy, and this continues for generations until they reach a verdict. If Johnny is guilty, they kill Johnny's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter. Alternatively, if Johnny died in some house Caudor gang war before he could have kids, they punish the descendants of anyone remotely related to him. If your ancestor was Johnny's neighbor, you are a perfectly valid target for punishment. And now this whole affair has to be added to the Book of Judgment as well. Because the Administratum, and therefore pretty much every record in the Imperium, is a game of telephone that's been going for 10,000 years, Hang the Thief can, and no doubt will eventually turn into, hang their third cousin twice removed spouse in front of the local planetary governor's office. Out of every organization in the Imperium, I think I can understand them usually just shooting people that bother them more than other Imperial institutions that do it. It's not even out of the usual Imperial disregard for human life. life, the Arbites just know that if they can't figure out a reason to call someone a criminal on the spot, they have to consult the trillions of preceding legal documents for the rest of their lives. Fuck that, I wouldn't want to read all that nonsense either. Shooting you in the head means I can actually make it to pub time after work is over. With all this said, it should be noted that in day-to-day life, the Arbites aren't really dealing with jaywalkers and whatnot. If they see one, that person's life is forfeit, but that isn't their main duty. Each planet does have their own local branch of law enforcement, which are colloquially called either enforcers, which is an Arbites rank, or Arbites, but not like the Adeptus Arbites, they're just Arbites. The Adeptus Arbites are called in for what the Imperium considers to be serious cases, which translates to things that affect the wider flow of the tithes and other important stuff like that, instead of silly things like serial killers. If a tithe shipment is delayed or missing, which is incidentally the start of the plot for the Lex Imperialis DLC in Rogue Trader, that's when they get called in to investigate. It's more of a general rule of thumb, like I said, and if somewhere like Necromunda sees gang warfare rise to such levels that it starts disrupting shipments, they absolutely will step in. But there's a scale any given issue needs to reach before the Arbites are sent in to crack heads, and if it doesn't reach the required disruption level, their attention will be elsewhere. If you're a run-of-the-mill criminal, or even someone that would to us be considered an absolutely heinous criminal, there's pretty good odds the Arbites themselves won't be called in to deal with you. Significant planets are the exception, of course, and as I mentioned earlier, I have to imagine that not only are the Arbites unbelievably common on Terra, but they come down at the slightest whiff of you being a bad egg. They get sent in to disrupt the massive lines that form queuing up for places. If the planet is important enough, they make themselves known frequently. And the flip side of them most likely ignoring you is that if the Arbites are called in to deal with you, you're in unbelievably deep shit. The Arbites hold power second only to the Inquisition, full stop. The Inquisition can act outside the law, but the Arbites are the law. Aside from no doubt having contacts in the Inquisition, a given member of the Arbites can call upon other organizations to help them in a given investigation or what have you. They're dealing with things that disrupt what makes the Imperium function. When they call upon you, they're calling upon you to deal with things that can end up with a planet or even a sector lost if it isn't dealt with, so they're bringing in the big guns. And that's assuming they don't just remake the very law for a given circumstance to force you to help them legally, or drown you in legal jargon and red tape until you have no choice. It's true that a judge who does this clumsily can get executed for this, because there are people overseeing things to keep corruption somewhat in check, but again, much like Judge Dredd, they are the law. Though saying the legal precedents they deal with are Byzantine in nature is putting it lightly, they can and will make snap judgments to see things done. If the Imperium of Man needs them to act immediately, they will. They follow the Lex and the Book of Judgment because they're trained from childhood to adhere to it and worship the damn thing. The Arbites are going to see at the very least the spirit of the law upheld, and given that the spirit of the law in the Imperium tends to be shoot criminals, potential criminals, or people near potential criminals in the face, you can imagine just how brutal they are when they throw down. In fact, every Arbites has carapace armor. By and large, carapace armor is the best armor anyone can expect to see, and is what the highest levels of the Guard wear into battle. The Arbites not only have that, but a specialized version of it, designed to be lightweight, flexible, and outright comfortable to wear. Their visored bucket helmets also make them immune to flashbangs, and you can also never tell where they're looking, which in some regards makes them even more intimidating than Space Marines. At least you'll know if a Space Marine is looking at you, but an Arbites can simply look vaguely forward, and the entire room won't know for certain if the gaze of the Lex is upon them or not. Their weapons are similarly powerful, with the most prominent, by which I mean coolest, being the shotguns, power mauls, and shields that they wear. 40k being 40k, the shield can block damn near anything it'll come across, the power maul is a power weapon, and so powerful, and the shotguns are the sort of thing that would probably just explode a person. When they take to the field, or rather take to the seedy underbelly of the Imperium, they roll up in squads of 10 to 20. This is both because that's a pretty good amount of Judge Dredds to throw at someone, and because that's conveniently the amount of Arbites sold in their kill team box, plus a dog for good measure. The Arbites are in short an entire organization of Judge Dredds, and you know what? That's fine. Not everything needs to be deeper than that. Do they overdo it with the intensity as often as not? Yes, they do. But that's part of the fun. Well, there is a novel omnibus about an Arbites named Shira Calpurnia. You don't have to read it to enjoy these guys. They can just stay at being a fun, oppressive organization. And while it may not be enough for those who've read every single Warhammer book and cry when someone says the word Sanguinius, it's enough for me. Let's do a mini do or don't for them, shall we? For lore positives, the Adeptus Arbites on the tabletop are the Imperium when its bureaucracy is actually functioning. Not necessarily functioning for the betterment of its people, but at least all the I's have been dotted and it's time to spring into action. For as much as the Imperium is barely functioning, barely does mean it still does something vaguely correctly every now and again. That's where the Arbites live. They're also fun for those who like it when 40k is equal parts science fiction and fantasy. The equipment of the Adeptus Arbites isn't anything too special by the setting standards. Oh, it's plenty more advanced than most of what they face, but it's mundane stuff at the end of the day, if still powerful. But the Imperium of Man is a theocracy, remember? The Lex Imperialis is very technically the word of the Emperor, and so Arbites are as much police officers and judges as they are priests. They uphold the law not only for stability, but because said law is the word of their god. It's a neat detail, and it makes them ever so slightly deeper as an organization than the army of Judge Dredds would otherwise be. That being said, they are an army of Judge Dredds. And while yes, they usually aren't fighting random criminals in the ass end of nowhere in a hive, they still can be found doing this. And the Imperium's a big place, so if you want your homebrew Arbites to be in the underhives more often than they're poring over legal proceedings, by all means have that be the case with your forces. It's not lore-breaking at all for them to be doing that. That's what Darktide is doing with its Arbites class, and that's an official Warhammer product. They do spend plenty of time in court, and they do all try to make a pilgrimage to the halls of judgment on Terra at least once in their lives, but come on. I'm assuming that if you're watching my channel, you're like me, and a 40k fan because we want to see people get blown away with a level of force well beyond anything proportionate. Don't let people who judge you for disliking Horus Heresy books convince you that an army of Judge Dredds isn't the coolest thing on the planet. They can, of course, still be fleshed out characters. As I can personally attest to, Salamorn from the Lex Imperialis DLC is a cool character. He's an Arbites and as loyal to the Lex as any other, but he complains about paperwork and loves his dog. The Arbites in Darktide may be near mindless servants of the Lex, but they don't have to be that, so your Arbites squad can be full of well-developed fellas. But again, they don't have to be that either. Be you want to try and make a 40k character that actually tries to uphold the law without brutal cruelty, or be you just want everyone in your kill team box to shoot children for missing the garbage can and accidentally littering, you can have fun either way here. For tabletop positives, the Arbites are, at least from my glancing at their rules, kinda goddamn cracked in some ways. We'll be looking at them in the form of how they play in an Imperial Agents army, rather than kill team. The majority of their weapons are at least strength 4, meaning you can achieve that ever so wonderful 4-up to wound on anything as tough as a Space Marine. Being able to wound Marine equivalents on a 4-up is quite nice, but it doesn't stop quite there. One guy can wield a grenade launcher to either get blast or D3 damage at strength 9 and AP 2, perfect for taking down heavier targets. One can take an Executioner shotgun, which is admittedly just their normal weapon with better range, strength, and AP, and actually does have less attacks, but it can be nice to turn a 4-up to wound to a 3-up to wound. One can take a Heavy Stubber for some more firepower, especially if you're in rapid fire range because then you get 3 extra shots. One can take the Excruciator Maul to give someone a couple good whacks in melee, and one guy can take a Weber. At first glance, the Weber is ass, but a torrent weapon with D6 attacks and devastating wounds can really surprise someone if you roll well. The standard shotgun and the Weber are also assault weapons, so while not every Arbites is able to run and gun, a little over half your squad at minimum will be able to. Of course, the fun doesn't stop there, because a few of your various law-abiding goobers can be equipped with things that help beyond bigger number hit harder. Annuncio Aquila can force enemy units within range of an objective to take a battle shock test. These things are servo-skull microphones, and so I have to imagine this is how the Arbites scream "hands where I can see them" before they start blasting. It doesn't work on vehicles or monsters, but that's fine. If played right, this can let you capture an objective while an entire enemy horde is sitting on it. You can take a medkit, which brings back D3 Arbites every command phase, which is pretty self-explanatory for why that's great. Ways to bring back models are always nice, and this does just that, and it also implies that Arbites are tougher than anything else in the setting. It's just a medkit, and so in the theoretical situation where someone is evaporated by a Baneblade, that guy can just slap a band-aid on the void where his torso used to be and get back to it. The Soul Guilt Scanner, aside from being the coolest named thing in 40k, lets your ranged weapons ignore cover. Not flashy, but certainly helpful. And with their Imperial Law ability, your Arbites can pick one unit in the enemy army to have lethal hits and precision against when they attack it. Not only is that very helpful, it's fitting to their lore. It makes the entire battle seem like the Arbites are there to apprehend a particular suspect or group of suspects taking part in it, which is incidentally also very 40k. Entire military forces marshaled because a couple of cops have the legal authority to requisition an entire guard regiment. They're also what I'd say to be fairly cheap cheap for all of this. 90 points gets you technically 11 of these guys, because while the dog can't hold a gun or anything, he can play fetch with a traitor's throat well enough. The good boy's bite attack is even strength 4, which means that this thing is mechanically as strong as Space Marines in melee combat. Their models are also just sick as hell for the last pro. They're a new kit that rides the line between homage and ripoff of the original Judge Dredd aesthetic. Good looking all around, I've got nothing further to say. For lore downsides, you are running one of the crueler forces in the Imperium with this in your army. Feel free to debate the exact morality of the Imperium of Man's orphan police force all you want, but they're hardly nice. Even if you buy into every piece of lore/propaganda that says the Imperium is justified in all it does, you are playing a unit of soldiers masquerading as police that is completely content to shoot first, ask questions never, document later, so other Arbites can do the same thing. Also, sometimes the Imperium orphans them on purpose, remember? So they aren't exactly the guys to be running if you want to pretend your 40k army is morally clean, instead of just enjoying this particular flavor of space racist. They're also rather out of place in the grandest of battles. Now, they can be found in big battles, because if nothing else, battles generally take place on planets, and Arbites generally practice law on planets. But in spite of how they're armed, armored, and fight, they aren't soldiers. So while everyone else is screaming battle cries, they're demanding you stop resisting before drop-kicking you like a payday cloaker. Admittedly, I just convinced myself that this negative is not only a positive, but null and void, because seeing Abaddon get drop-kicked by a cloaker would fill my heart with endless joy, but for those of you who want a bit more of a proper, serious army, they may not be the best. At least for large-scale engagements. In smaller skirmishes, they're more than at home. Another downside for their lore is that they're not usually going to be found in the most proactive of circumstances. They tend to come in when things are going wrong for tithes or other vital Imperial organizations and functions, and as such aren't going to be found crusading into the heart of battle zones for no other reason than to kill the bad guys found there. That can and will be done, but usually only because it's doing something like affecting the tithe. Again, you can pretty easily imagine a reason around this, and if nothing else, a planet getting eaten by Tyranids is as good a reason as any for them to take up arms. But if you want your army to be the kind that invades Orc worlds, Eldar craft worlds, and other offensive actions like that, a unit of Arbites isn't the best thing to take. I'd call the Arbites for rooting out a Genestealer cult, but otherwise I'd probably see if I couldn't grab some Cadians or Ultramarines if I'm going invading. The arguable worst downside is that you're gonna have the Cops theme song stuck in your head every time you look at these minis. Now, instinctively hearing bad boys, what you gonna do may be fun the first few times, but when you start closing your eyes and hearing it in your dreams, you may be in for a very unique nightmare. As for tabletop downsides, the most important thing is that you are playing Imperial agents. This is not an army. This is 20 different character models, kill team boxes, and the occasional unit from an actual army, all pretending they're a unified force. So unless you plan on collecting about 2,000 points of Arbites, this army is going to be disjointed and whack as hell. Disregard this point if you plan on collecting 2,000 points of Arbites and nothing else. I have no idea if that's even legal to run, but for the sheer dedication to the bit, I think anyone you offer to play against would allow it. Their stat lines aside from their weapons and abilities are also nothing to really take note of. At Toughness 3, they already can't take the heat as much as they can dish it out, and while a 4-up save is nice, anything with any amount of AP will put the hurt on them. 6 inches of movement also isn't blowing anyone's mind away, so be wary of that as well. Their equipment is also awkward to use because of how much there is. Mechanically, this isn't a detriment, but when playing, you need to remember who has what ability item, who has what weapon, remember the 1,000 different special rules they have. Most of their optional weapons not having assault can also make deciding whether or not to advance them difficult. It's a lot of things to consider and take account of, and this unit can be a bit clunky as a result. And the last downside for their tabletop is that their price per dollar value is abysmal. At $65 getting you 90 points, you get yourself 1.38 points per dollar you spend on the Adeptus Arbites. Using this as a kill team, go ahead because it's all you need. Using this in 40k proper, you get poop for your value. Hope you don't mind donating to the fine enforcers of the Lex, because if you want to run them, they have a hefty cost. And that was the Adeptus Arbites. They are, in fact, the law. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the Judge Dredd reference to my anything about the Adeptus Arbites, the thing truly keeping it all together. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Law.